Hello and welcome to another interview here in the Wannabe Entrepreneur podcast, the podcast about what's really like to bootstrap a company. And today we are going to speak with an expert in bootstrapping and building in public. His name is Arvid Kahl, which I just learned that is also German, even though he's living at the moment in Toronto. Welcome, Arvid.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, it's surprising how many Germans you find in entrepreneurship or people who've been to Germany. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on the show today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. And I also want to say that you can find Germans actually everywhere. Like it's funny because every time I'm traveling now, and anywhere you can be like in the Amazonia or like really remote places, there's always one German there, it seems.
Well, I think it's just our current entrepreneurship culture, or just culture in general, makes people want to just travel, experience the world before they settle down or something. And it's just so easy to get around. And honestly, for me, as an entrepreneur, I mean, I'm in Canada now, right? I moved 3 months ago. But when we actually had our business, FeedbackPanda, my partner, Danielle, my girlfriend and I, when we had our SaaS business, we were operating it both from Berlin most of the year. And then over Christmas, we would come here to Canada where her family is. She's Canadian. We would spend a good month in Canada and we would operate our business from here. And it would be no difference because it's a digital business. Everything is on the computer anyway. So we would just run the business from anywhere. We could have went to, I don't know, like Southeast Asia and run our business from there.
Especially if you're a digital entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
Completely, I totally agree. And it's also interesting that now that you speak about Germans' mentality of traveling around and kind of visiting the world before settling down, because that's something that we don't have it here in Portugal. So in Portugal, what you're taught is that you should do everything right away. So you do high school, you do college, you get a job, and the fastest possible, the faster the better for you. But it's quite common in Germany to have a gap year, and a lot of people that I've met actually spend that gap year in South America visiting I don't know, Mexico or Argentina or something like that. Why is that? Why is this the mentality?
Well, I think I honestly, I can't really tell you because I didn't take a gap year. I went to the military, which is funny enough. Like German military, it's like a volunteer. You can go there. You can do your 9 months of service, or you don't have to anymore. It used to be mandatory, but it hasn't been. But I went there anyway in the early 2000s, and I had my own gap year, which was just like experiencing the military, which was its own little interesting experience, can tell you that. But then I went right to university, but I didn't really take university too seriously. I think I spent more time playing World of Warcraft at that point than I went to university. But that itself was my little gap year because I was exploring Azeroth, the fictional continent of Azeroth, with the other players, and in doing so, I funny enough, I had connections to people all over the world. I learned how to speak English fluently because school English just doesn't really apply, right? You don't really know how to speak this language if you just go to school and go to class, but you have to immerse yourself. And I did that through my World of Warcraft essentially. I also was in a raid guild, which is in World of Warcraft terms just means you hang out multiple evenings a week and you fight big dragons together for hours on end, try to organize 40 people to get to kill the dragon together. And I was organizing this, so I was like organizing these raids in the guild. So all of a sudden I had managerial experience because I needed to get these people together and get them to perform optimally as a team. So my gap year was virtual. It was full of dragons.
You're already in the metaverse. You're in the metaverse.
Yeah, before it was a term. So, but I think historically this comes from what the Germans call Wanderjahre, which is like the years of wandering around, which I think in the Middle Ages or just the Enlightenment time was when young men were just going around trying to find a profession, a skill, a trade, and they would wander around Germany trying to find masters in a craft, like carpenters or cobblers, shoemakers, like all these kind of things, and learn from them for a couple months, and then wander around to another master in another town, stay with them, work for them for free, essentially, for lodging and
kind
food.
of internships.
It's internships that people were just like roaming around the country and learning as much as they could. I think that's a traditional German thing, or a Middle European thing, Central European thing. You find that in Poland and the Czech Republic and Austria too. That's a thing that people did. And I think now we just do it in a digital way or in a global way. Either way. And both of them are very important. And I find it's something you should definitely do if you can afford it. Because it will just open up your perspective on life.
Yeah, and I think that's also, I think you just touched on a very key point, which is if you can afford it. And I think what I've experienced in Germany is that there's a lot of money and people. It's very easy also to get jobs. So there's actually no problem to just taking a gap year. And here in Portugal, people, they really need money and they want to. They cannot afford some of the times to take a gap year. But Arvid, it's we started to talk and I didn't properly introduce yourself. I guess a lot of people already know you, but you, as I said, like you are a true entrepreneur. You had your own company called FeedbackPanda, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you wrote already a couple of very interesting books, The Embedded Entrepreneur, Zero to Sold, and now you are writing a book about actually a building public book. So you're writing a book with your audience, and this is something I want to talk with you about. But before, I would like for you to just, in your own words, introduce yourself and say a little bit more about who is Arvid.
Okay. Well, I always try to avoid categories because it would be easy to say I used to be a software engineer, then I turned into an entrepreneur plus software engineer, and then I turned into a writer plus entrepreneur plus software engineer. I kind of it's kind of stacking things, right? Yeah. But honestly, I'm just what I found out over all these years is that I'm a person that really likes to help other people help themselves, and everything that I do is kind of aimed at that. I want to show people what I'm doing so they can do these same things successfully or do their thing, whatever it is, successfully, and whatever skills I have at the time, either software engineering or building businesses or now writing and telling stories, that is what I use to do it. Right? That's what I think I am. That's what I'm at my core is trying to get people to where they want to be by lifting them up a little bit, by helping them along their way. They still have to do the work themselves. I'm not going to do it for them, but I'm going to try to help them as much as I can to find their path forward. And that's why I write. That's why I record a podcast every week. That's why I have a newsletter that shares what I'm writing every week. That's why I'm engaging with people on Twitter. I think 27 hours every day, kind of feels like it. And that's why I'm talking to you right now, because I derive so much energy from sharing what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, and seeing other people either get this little moment of joy by just hearing somebody very energetic talk about a thing that I personally like, or listening to this and getting one tiny little new thing out of it and applying it to their business or their journey, their creator's journey or whatever. And then, that's why I do this. And that's who I am. Every single day I want to have these kind of moments because they just propel me forward. And
it's funny because you told me before we started recording that you are an introvert. But when you start talking about entrepreneurship and helping people and bootstrapping, you kind of become an extrovert and you actually get energy from that, right? Which is kind of the opposite of being an introvert. So do you think that you are becoming an extrovert, which is also possible? Or why do you think this is?
Well, I think it's a continuum. I learned that I used to be... where do I start this story? So when I first joined... a company called Coding in Silicon Valley was my first job. I got it on Twitter. Funny enough, that's a story I can also share if you're interested in it. But in 2012, I was pretty active as a software engineer on GitHub. I built a couple of projects just to see if I can build it. Back then, CoffeeScript was all the rage, which was like JavaScript, a version of JavaScript, kind of that compiled to JavaScript. And it was super interesting. People really liked that, and it was new. And MongoDB was the big new database, and I just built a little project. So somebody reached out to me on Twitter in 2012 saying, "Hey, I've seen your project on GitHub. We use the same technology in our business. Do you want to join us? Do you need a job?" I was living in Dresden, Germany at the time. And I was saying, yeah, cool. San Francisco, that sounds interesting. So they invited me over there. I hung out with them, spent a couple of weeks just like looking into what they did and all of that. And then I went back to Dresden, and I had a cool job there with the Silicon Valley venture funded company. I wasn't even studying computer science at that point. I was studying philosophy and political science. Like it was pretty strange, but that's how I got my first job. And at that time, they were so big into personality profiles, into the Myers-Briggs test, right? This kind of INTP, ENTP thing. And back then, I think I scored an INTP, so an introverted. I don't even know what the other things are. What is it, like perceptive and all that kind of stuff. So the I is important. I was scoring pretty heavily on the introvert scale. And over time, I noticed that whenever I did the test again, I moved way more into the middle. I was extroverted in some ways, and I was introverted in others. And what I really understood was that my passion for whatever I was talking about heavily impacted on if I derived energy from it or if I spent energy talking about it. If you ask me to talk about certain things that I'm not interested in, or that I'm not as interested in as I may be in entrepreneurship and audience building and building in public, you will see that I quickly tire of that conversation.
So what happens when you go to a party, let's say, and you start speaking with people that do not care too much about entrepreneurship, and they just bring whatever sports or like, do you feel that then you get tired of the conversation quicker? Like, are you more shy? How do you interact?
Absolutely. I mean, I may not be shy because I've learned how to communicate with people in a way that makes them interested in what I have to say. But I will just retreat from those conversations. Like if people talk about something, and I guess nobody goes to parties anymore, at least not over the last couple of years. And I guess if there was a party now, people would be talking about vaccination nonstop, and that would be kind of boring. But
it's very boring.
If I recall being at like family functions and all that stuff, if people talk about something that I'm not interested in, I just either I find somebody that I can talk to about the things that I'm interested in, or I retreat from the conversation. It's really what I do. And in that regard, I'm introverted.
And it's funny, I can relate a lot to what you just say. And sometimes I feel that I'm talking with my friends, and I feel like, okay, I'm only talking about entrepreneurship. And then I started wonder that if they would get tired of it. Is that something that
probably
comes from your mind, or not so much?
Well, the difference that I've noticed in any kind of conversation about any kind of topic is the moment you stop talking as a teacher, the moment you stop preaching, and the moment you actually show curiosity in somebody else's opinion on whatever subject that is, the conversation is much more enjoyable, right? If you talk about entrepreneurship and it turns into a lecture, obviously people will not enjoy that anymore after a couple minutes. But if you contextualize it within the life experience of the other person, like, oh yeah, this sounds like this entrepreneurship thing that I've been doing, and tell me more about what you did in that moment and how it made you feel, or what did you learn that you could then later apply in your job or in your hobby or whatever. The moment you turn this into something about them and not just about you, and talking about entrepreneurship and what you learned and how great of an entrepreneur you are, then this becomes a much more pleasant conversation. I think it's a general rule of thumb that if you show interest in other people, they'll be more interested in you. So, you know, it's just really how you approach conversations in general.
And this is actually a great bridge to speak a little bit about your book, The Embedded Entrepreneur, How to Build an Audience-Driven Business. And this is very interesting because the way I started, I guess most of my projects so far were, I kind of found a problem, something that I got excited about. I started with an idea. For instance, I have a climate change app. It's called Change It. And I started because it was my own problem. I wanted to do something about climate change. I didn't know what. So I built this problem. But I was not into the medium, not into the community at all, right? So I built it. And then I started the podcast, and I realized that there's this new, for me at least, it's new idea of audience first approach. And do you want to? I would like to hear in your own words, what is this? What is the build an audience first approach business?
So there's two ways of building a business, right? One is a product first approach, where you build the thing and then you share it with the world and you hope that people buy it.
Right.
And then there's the audience first approach, which is flip side of that, which is you build a product with and for an audience that you have found or created before you ever start building the product. You start with the people, right? You start with the community, you embed yourself in the community, you learn about not what you should build, but what the problems are that people have. You have conversations with people about what are the most pressing, critical problems in your life and in your business journey, in your entrepreneurial journey, in your hobby journey, whatever. It depends on the community that you're in. And then you start analyzing these problems for potential solutions. And then you have chats with people about how they currently solve their problems, and if they spend money on it or not, if they have a budget, or if they would never pay for anything like that. And then if you have validated that, you go to the next step and you actually start building it, and you have prototypes and you share that with your community, and you get people to test them before you ever share them with the community at large. Like it's a people-driven approach. The product first approach is a build-driven approach, where you as a builder, either a software engineer or a no-coder or a marketer or a writer, whatever, you create the product first, and then you try to stuff it into a market by doing a lot of marketing, a lot of sales, which is a valid approach for many, many things out there. But the audience-driven approach, the audience-first approach, whatever you want to call it, is a more validated way that is more conducive to things like bootstrapping, like self-funding a business, and a community-driven approach, in a sense that if you are part of a community of people that is already engaging and talking about problems and solutions, about the issues and challenges that they're facing, then building a business, building a product out of there is much easier, because you have validation baked into every single step along the way. The visualization to this that makes it very, very clear is that if you know the website Product Hunt, where people launch products every single day, you will always see a couple of products that are listed every single day on the top that have a lot of engagement. They have a lot of upvotes, that have a lot of people liking them, a lot of people voting for them, having questions and cheering for the person that launched it.
The
and
ones I always envy when I look at them. I was like, how come they are there and I'm here in the bottom?
Yeah, well, exactly. Why are these people so successful with their product that is no better than the product that is like in rank 50 or 57 or 100, right? A lot of people launch products every day, and only 5 of them make it to the top, obviously. And then there's the big rest, the long tail on the bottom. And most of these products on the bottom are equally good products, like from the skill of the people building them, from how they solve a problem. They are good. They're good products. It's just that they don't have this amplification audience that when they are launched. And the thing is that most people don't understand about Product Hunt. Product Hunt is not a reflection of how good your product is. Product Hunt is how good is your existing audience? How many people are already there to support you? And only that will get you upvoted in Product Hunt.
It's very interesting that you say that, because actually in today's episode of the podcast that I just shared, I speak about Product Hunt, and I speak exactly about that. And that's something that applies not only to Product Hunt, but to most social media, which is most of social media's algorithm is the number of engagement your post has in the least amount of time, right? And I think that's how most algorithms work. And it's the same with Product Hunt. When you share on Product Hunt, the idea, you are first in the newest, for I think 24 hours, you are in the newest products frame, and then you can be bumped to the featured products, right? Based on your performance. And that's something that I've never thought about before. And I have to be honest, I love entrepreneurship, and I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, and no one ever mentioned this. So no one ever, I guess most of them follow the product-driven approach. And it makes total sense. The moment you have an audience, you are able to trick, quote unquote, the algorithm so that you get a lot of engagement quickly, and the algorithm will say, okay, this is a great product. So it's probably, let's bump it to the featured product or something.
Yeah, and I don't think it's even tricking the algorithm. I mean, that's why the algorithm is the way it is, because it wants to see, are enough people already convinced that this is a good post. And if you have built an audience of people who think that whatever you say is good, well, then it is good, right? Because if it wasn't, you would not have the audience.
Right, but I mean, you can have an audience. Let's say you are whatever, a pop star or something, and people just follow you, blindly.
Oh, yeah.
But it doesn't mean the product is good.
Sorry, I mean, let's just look at the definition of the word good. It doesn't mean of a like an objectively good quality. It is good to create more engagement on the social media that you're using it on, right? The algorithm looks for stuff that is good for Twitter. Like Twitter wants to amplify stuff where more people click on Twitter, more people look at Twitter, more people scroll on your profile and then follow you and build relationships. So it validates for the Twitter algorithm that this is good Twitter content, and that's kind of what I mean. Like obviously, quality of the post itself and quality of the product, that is something outside of the scope of the algorithm of Twitter. But most of the time, it's also correlated, because you have to think about the fact that people don't follow and engage with everybody. They follow and engage with a limited amount of people, because as humans, we only have this limited capacity of building relationships, right? The Dunbar number is like for personal relationships, and there probably is a digital version of how many people can I actively engage with on Twitter that I care about. And the people who you choose to follow on Twitter and you choose to retweet and interact with, that's a limited number. It may be a couple dozens, it may be a couple hundred, but for every person out there, that is a limited number. So the more people you get to follow you and retweet you and like you, the more your content apparently is something helpful, meaningful, instructive, insightful, entertaining, whatever it is. So there is a measure of good quality for whatever reason, insightful quality, entertainment quality, can be anything that a large amount of active and engaged followers expresses to the world. So I would say there is a certain amount of this is good in a highly engaged tweet. It could be this is good at shitposting, or this is good at being sarcastic. But, there is a certain kind of quality that every highly engaged tweet reaches.
Yeah. So do you think it's a fair measure of how good the product is somehow?
In a non-complete way, yes, in a probability based scenario. Like if you, like, particularly with founders that have a larger audience, you could expect that if they release a new product, for example, you see this in the indie hacker space quite a bit. Like, people have a thing going on, and then they build another project, and then they launch it, and then their existing audience amplifies the project. Well, why did this project come to happen? The founder didn't just have a random idea and then they built it. It is quite likely that if they have a large audience, they have been building an audience first and audience centric product, because they have found out that a big share of their audience have a problem that they could solve. And then they engaged with their audience. They told them, well, I'm thinking about building this tool. What needs do you have? And then their audience gave them feedback, and they said, well, this is my problem. I solve it every 2 weeks because it's a bi-weekly report that I need to create. And I use these tools for it. And then the founder creates something better, shares it with their audience, and they say, okay, this is really good, but it needs this kind of additional feature. And then they build it. And, like they build it in public, they build it with their audience, and then they launch it as a product that exactly solves the problem for a validated existing audience out there. So of course it's going to be better than a random product, because it's been validated all along the way.
Yeah, and you have a distribution channel too immediately.
Yeah, they might have paying customers before they launch it.
Exactly, yeah. And so let's go back to these two approaches, the audience first approach and then the product first approach. So
sure,
would you say that the product first approach is more connected with VC and the typical Silicon Valley way of building companies?
I think yes, because that's just really how software products used to work. Like, that you would have to build the thing. And I'm talking about software products mostly, right? Software as a service businesses and platforms and stuff like that. Because that's where I'm from. I know that there's other kind of content, but even that, like, even if you look at info products like books and courses, they used to be written long before they were marketed and just disseminate it into the public, right? People going through the regular publishing industry, if they were writers, they would send a draft of what they wanted to write about, and then the publisher would say, yes, write that book. Then they would write that book. Then the editors would come in. Then there would be revisions. And then at some point, the book would be done. The editor said, yeah, that's great. And now we're going to market it to the community out there. That's the first time people would learn of that book. Right. And the same is for software products. People would sit in their basements for 6 months and build a product. I've done that in the past to horrendous effects. Like, it really didn't work out. With teams of people, we built and built and built, and then we launched it and it fizzled out because nobody needed the product because we hadn't validated it. It was horrible. But that was the way that most things were built, because that's also how funding used to work. Yeah. People would fund a business plan, and then people would build the product that was promised in the business plan once they got the funding. Exactly. Mostly because, in the world of building physical products, that's how it used to work. You need inventory, you need the machines, you need a factory, whatever. And this needs upfront money. So you need to have a business plan upfront and then get people to pay you that money so you can build it. It's just the way it used to be. Yeah. And that is where the capital, not just venture capital, but all capital used to be allocated in businesses like that. And venture capital has been moving this into the software world and has kept the paradigm going, where you put a lot of money into the business, they build the product in stealth mode, and then they launch it, and then marketing happens, and then market share is assumed that they get every customer in the potential market, and then they grow and explode, and a rocket ship
and
happens.
And it also requires a lot of money, right? Like, it requires a lot of money to do marketing. Most of the money for a lot of companies are spent in marketing, especially in the initial, after you having the product. And I felt that this now I understand, this is what was always missing for me as a bootstrapper, because again, I was reading and I was listening to podcasts, and a lot of the teachings are the same. Try to do a lean approach, build an MVP, collect ideas from your audience, and then build, especially in software, of course. But then every time I tried it, it didn't work. It's like, okay, but I don't get customers. So that it would be like I would build something, but then I don't get customers. What's happening? And then I started this podcast. Now I have some kind of an audience also for the podcast. And now I start to understand what is the problem that this audience needs to be solved. And it's funny because for instance, I'm in a side of the podcast. I'm also building a virtual co-working space for bootstrappers, and it's much easier to get feedback for people because I already have the audience. I can speak with them directly. It's much easier to get paying customers too, because again, there's already an audience. But this is something that was at least in this VC, Y Combinator podcast and so on. I feel that they never talked about this.
Yeah, and I think it's. It should be something that is logical to everybody building a business, right? Like, a business is really by definition a process that allows you to reliably sell the same product over and over again. And if you want to sell the same product over and over again, it needs to be a product that people want to buy over and over again. And it needs to be a product that people need to use so they can justify paying money. And to be able to need to use it, they need to have a critical problem. And to be able to have enough people who reliably have this problem, so they need to buy something to solve it, there needs to be enough people out there. So it really starts with people. And I think people have just forgotten that they need to validate this, because we've been so focused on solving our own problems, particularly if you're a software engineer. Like, you build stuff, you run into little hiccups, and you think, oh, I need to build a web uptime monitoring thing, or I need to build an error tracking thing, or I need to build a notification bar, or stuff like that, stuff that we need ourselves. And then we forget that we are in an industry of people who love solving their own problems, like, particularly for software engineers. Every software engineer out there is trying to build developer tools for other developers, because that's the problem space they know. But they completely forget that they just spent solving their own problem, and every software engineer out there loves solving their own problems. Like, it's literally the worst space to solve problems in, is a space where people love a challenge. Yeah, it's a bizarre thing, but people built, and then nobody uses their products because people just don't have the critical problem. They can solve it themselves. So it is imperative that you understand who you are solving problems for, what problems they actually have that they can't solve themselves really well, and then build a solution to that problem. It starts with people, and it starts with listening, not assuming, but with listening and observing people in their communities talking about the problems that they cannot solve easily themselves.
I would also say that it starts with finding this community, right?
Yeah. Really.
And this is something that I also want to ask you. So let's say that there is a software developer that always wanted to build their own product, right?
Yeah. And
they want to do the audience first approach, but they have no audience. So how do you start? Like, what are the first steps?
Yeah. Okay. So the most important thing, I kind of hinted at it already just now saying this about software engineers. You don't have to solve problems for software engineers. You can solve problems for anybody else out there. It's not just software engineers, even though you think that might be the perfect audience because you understand them so well because you're one of them. Doesn't mean that you're limited to solving problems for other software engineers. And that's kind of what I talk about in The Embedded Entrepreneur. That's essentially what the book starts with. It's this guide, this step-by-step guide to figuring out who else you could be serving beyond the group of people that comes up first in your mind if you think about who should I help, right? Because if you're a software engineer, you want to help software engineers. If you're a marketer, you want to help other marketers. If you're a teacher, you want to help other teachers. But it's not the only thing you can do. So what I describe in the book, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown here, you and the audience right now, is you try to figure out what potential audiences you could be serving. And that's a brainstorming activity. It's kind of think about anybody who out there that is a group of people that have shared problems, shared interests, shared goals that are essentially establishing communities around these goals, these interests, these practices, and write them down. And I'm just going to go through this exercise right now for myself because that's the easiest way for me to do it. I'm sitting here in my office, surrounded by quite a number of computers that I use for my coding, right? I'm a software engineer, so I write down software engineer. I also look at, software engineer is quite the generic kind of description for what a lot of different people do as very different activities. So I write down the kind of sub audiences that I have in software engineering. I'm a front-end engineer sometimes. I'm a back-end engineer sometimes. I'm a mobile engineer sometimes. Sometimes I build software infrastructure. I'm a DevOps engineer. Sometimes I do database stuff. So I'm a database administrator. I write down front-end engineer, back-end engineer, infrastructure stuff, database administrator, whatever. So now I have 5 little things that are just audiences from the thing that I know professionally the best. Then I look at what else am I doing here. I'm a writer. So I write down writer. I write down nonfiction author because I write nonfiction books. I don't write stories about people. I write instructional content. But I also write down fiction author because that's something interesting. Came out in my brainstorming session. I noticed that I could also be helping fiction authors, right? Fiction
so
authors
these are things that you're already doing.
Exactly. I can write down all of these little audiences, and that's what I'm currently doing at this moment. Now, I'm going back through my life and just looking into the other experiences that I had, professional or non-professional. I used to work in a printing business. Like I used to work for a print shop. So I write down print businesses. I used to work for a factory where they vacuum painted some kind of what was it, like a car utilities or something. I write down my experiences that I had in professional businesses, all of them. I put them in a list, and I look into my professional experiences with other people. In running my the business with my partner, we had to talk to tax advisors, we had to talk to lawyers, we had engaged with them, and we've seen that they had certain problems in their interaction with us that we could probably have made easier with a tool or two. So I'm writing down tax advisors, I'm writing down lawyers and notaries. Now I look at my partner, Danielle. She was an online English teacher. She's an opera singer. Now I look into her family. We have plumbers, we have nurses, we have construction workers, we have mail delivery people. I'm just looking into my own family at this point too. We have people who are working, who are students. They're studying at a university. People who are working as secretaries in an office. And then I look into my friends and family. I have gym owners. I have, I'm just going into like all the people I know, and I write down what they do professionally and what they like doing as a hobby.
but now you have thousands of
Yeah,
communities. So how do you pick the ones you actually want to work at?
that's the next step. In the book, I go through each of these communities and I start ranking them,
Hmm.
because you want to find a community that you really enjoy. You want to find a community that has interesting problems. You want to find a community that pays money to solve their problems, and you want to find a community that is large enough for you to start a business, but not
Hmm.
so large that there's already gigantic businesses with gigantic budgets in there. So that's the 4 steps that you would go through for each of these communities, and you give them a ranking somewhere between 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, whatever floats your boat, however granular you want to be. You look at each of these things, you put them in an Excel sheet or in a list somewhere, and you go through what I call affinity. How much do I like this? Right?
Right.
I look at software engineers and I have a scale from 0 to 5, and I say, okay, I do like software engineers, but like I already said, they love solving their own problems. So as a business, they probably score a 4 or a 3 on my 0 to 5 kind of scoring there. And then
Right.
I look at entrepreneurs and I give them a pure 5 because I love helping people build businesses. I look at writers, pure 5. I want to help more writers or more maybe entrepreneurial writers build their own writing habit. And then I look at tax advisors and I give them a 1 because I really am not a fan. I mean,
Yeah.
it's they do their job and it's important to have taxes and stuff, but I don't want to spend the next 10 years of my life
Exactly.
working with people who love taxes. It's really
Yeah.
not my thing.
And I think that's a
And
very good exercise too, right? So to
yeah,
see if you actually love something or are passionate about something is to do this exercise where you
yeah.
think about, can I work in this product for the next 10 years or
That's
15
one of
years?
the most important things to do right from the start, which is why I start with it. Right?
Yeah.
If you see an audience, no matter how much money you could be making building a business for them,
Yeah.
if you hate building a business with these people, if you hate having a customer service conversation because you just don't relate with these people, you're not going to have a good time building a business.
Yeah.
You better build a business for people that you can actually resonate with. And that's the thing. I'm a software engineer. Like, you would think that the people that I resonate with most are software engineers, but they're not. Like, I resonate much more with writers than I do with software engineers, even though software engineers are writers too. They just write for a computer, right? They give instruction to a
Yeah.
computer, while a nonfiction writer gives instruction to people.
I feel that sometimes, let's say you studied software engineering, so you are in this cubicle, you are in this box, you can
Yeah.
only hang out with software engineers, you can only work as a software engineer. And for me, it's really hard for me to think about me as a podcaster because I'm also a software engineer, right? So I worked in tech companies, and
Yeah.
now I'm thinking, okay, but now I'm a podcaster, and I feel somehow ashamed sometimes to say to people that now I'm trying to make it as a podcaster, which is very different than a software engineering. And did you feel that in society, there's still this kind of embarrassment of getting out of your little box of what you
Yes.
studied?
Yeah, it's also a comfort zone thing, right? Because in many ways we are taught that specialization is everything. Like, you go to school, you specialize in one particular thing. You go to college, you go to university, you get a degree in this one thing, and then you do that for the rest of your life. I
Yeah.
think this was a pre digital society thinking.
Yeah.
This was a pre-creator economy thinking, because we now notice that there is no straight path. Being an adaptive generalist, like a T-shaped person, like having a broad range of skills, and then being a specialist in one of them, or what I call M-shaped, like you are a generalist, and then you have a deep knowledge of multiple different disciplines within that. That is the kind of skill set you need for the future, right? You need to be able, as a podcaster in entrepreneurship, you need to know a lot about entrepreneurship, and you need a lot about how to talk to people. These are two things that may have an intersecting kind of area, but usually are quite different. An entrepreneur talks about revenue, they talk about like opportunity, marketing, all that thing. A podcaster is more an empathetic person. They need to be able to draw information from other people in a conversation. That is not necessarily the same. So you need to do both and then combine them into something holistic. I believe that in the creator economy, where people also, where the economy itself changes so quickly, you need to be more adaptive, and you need to be able to build a deep level of skill in multiple disciplines at the same time, and then use your intersectional qualities of those skills to find the niche that works best for you.
But I also feel that if you don't want to be an entrepreneur and if you want to work for someone else, it's more required for you to specialize in one single thing. And that was my biggest, or one of my, what I was really scared when I was moving or quitting my job and going towards entrepreneurship, because I thought, okay, now I will stop being, a specialized software developer. And if this doesn't work out, and I want to return to a company, I want to work again in this area, I will be losing in comparison with my peers and my colleagues that did not go through this entrepreneurship, because people, and I felt as well, because I was working, let's say, for Trivago, and after let's say 6 months, I already wanted to implement my own thing. This being an entrepreneur is always inside of me, but then they don't want me to do that, because they're like, no, Tiago, we want you to code this feature. That's why we pay you. And so I feel that there is this kind of things. In one hand, if you want to kind of, let's say, follow the traditional path, then you need to focus in one area. And if you want to become an entrepreneur, you need to kind of spread out through multiple fields.
Oh, absolutely. And I think if you want to become an entrepreneur, it's important that you say it that way, because not every person will be happy being an entrepreneur. Right? We all can try it. We all can go for it and see if it works for us. But if spending 10, 12-hour days building a business that you're not sure if it will survive or not, and the stress levels and the anxiety that comes with that, if that is too much for you, if you would rather have a 9-to-5 where work is done when I leave work, that is also fine. To me, it's a question of upside and downside. Right? If you take a regular employment, you have capped downside, because you will be protected by the law. You will have a contract, and the contract states that if you spend so and so much time every week working for these people, they have to pay you, and they can't fire you if the work you do is okay. Right? You're protected. And your upside is also capped. You won't be making much more than your salary and maybe some bonus. That's really, and that's also in the contract, so you know what to expect. Then when you look at entrepreneurship, your upside is unlimited. You can build a business that you completely own. You can grow it over time. It maybe in the beginning it makes no money at all. Half a year later, it makes a couple $1,000 a month. It sustains itself. Then a year later, it sustains you because it makes $10,000 a month. So after expenses, you can pay yourself a couple $1,000, and you can pay your mortgage and your food and all that stuff. 2 years later, it makes 20, 30,000. 10 years later, it makes $1 million a year. You sell the business and you're set for life. Unlimited upside. But of course, downside is also unlimited. You could lose everything. You could lose all the money that you put into the business if you don't. If you run it without having a company around it, and you lose somebody's data and they sue you for millions of dollars. Now you're personally liable, right? If you don't set it up in a way that it's a limited liability situation. So with unlimited upside comes unlimited downside, and most people are not happy to work in a kind of way that has unlimited downside. You have to have a certain kind of appetite for risk to be able to sustain that throughout your journey. Now, with a bootstrap business, usually you have you don't take on a massive amount of debt. You don't build systems that are super critical. You're building an iteration of something out there that is just a little bit better for a more specific audience. It's usually not that risky, and you can run it as a side project while you do your job and all that kind of stuff. We can get to that in a second. But what I personally feel is that being employed has a certain downside beyond what you think your downside is. And that is that you can just be let go and you have no ownership whatsoever to create income for you while you're looking for a new job, right? As an entrepreneur, you could just do some freelancing on the side, or you could have an info product out there like a book or a course that is sharing your learnings from the journey that can make you some money on the side, even though it's not your main business. The moment you diversify your income sources and you look for passive income, which is a scale, right? There's a scale between active income and massive income. I would love that. Passive income. And you start out on the far active side by selling your time for money. And then ideally, being entrepreneurial, you move towards having a diversified passive income set somewhere out there. And that is a journey that takes some time, but I highly recommend for people to at least try it, because you can always be let go. The pandemic was a big problem for many people. They noticed that their secure job all of a sudden wasn't so secure anymore.
Yeah, but Arvid, in this sense, at least maybe we have different experiences. Maybe you are in a more advanced stage of your companies. But for me, when I look to, especially working in Germany, the salary I was making, the benefits I had, for instance, I was working in a startup as well in the travel business. Yeah. And when COVID hit, okay, if it was maybe another country or something, there would be no support. And then the German state gave a lot of support that basically made sure that the company would stay. So for me, it feels almost impossible for me to be able to generate the salary that I would otherwise generate as a software developer, because software developers in Germany can generate with 100K a year, right? So for you, that's what I noticed now. For me as a bootstrapper to generate a salary of 100K a year,
oh boy,
it's absurd. It's really it's a lot of work, a lot of luck as well. So for me, I really think that doing for the money, of course, and you're absolutely right, there's no cap, downside in the down and in the ceiling, there's no ceiling, right? But in reality, there's probably some kind of ceiling, because the probability of someone making 100K a year, at least, I don't know if you have a different opinion, but for me it seems that it's not that high. And and for me, the idea is it's what I love about being an entrepreneur is having the control, being the one that is creating this. This is my company. This is my share of good that I'm doing to the world. So I don't know. Maybe that we have different opinions there.
I don't think so. I mean, obviously, not everybody will succeed, right? That's why entrepreneurship is a risky business, quite literally, because there is no guaranteed outcome. It's the same with like building an audience first business. Just because you are looking at your audience and you are detecting their problems and you're trying to build a solution, doesn't mean that you will necessarily have $1 million business. There is so much along the way that needs to happen. You need to, you need to be lucky too, right? And at some point, you need to increase your opportunity surface by trying out multiple things. It's like what Daniel Vassallo calls its portfolio of small bets. Like, you need to make small bets and see which one of them are more fruitful than the others, and then you need to hone in on them, and then you need to do more bets and see if they are performing better than the ones you already made. Like, entrepreneurship is risk. Entrepreneurship has a lot of failure, and entrepreneurship is not something that is guaranteed or quick. Like, you were talking about $100,000 or euros in yearly income. This is not something that will happen overnight. This is something that might take years to get to, and it might not work at all with the one idea that you have, right? If you want to build, and I don't know what exactly just to take as an example here, but if you want to build a software like an uptime monitoring software in a market that already is quite saturated, you might be able to build it to, I don't know, $20,000-$30,000 MRR within your little niche of indie hackers or something, and then it won't go higher because the top market is already captured by the bigger software infrastructure companies out there. So that means it's $200,000 a year that you might make. In the best case, you probably won't even get there. So the business itself might not even generate 100,000, let alone you could take that as dividends or as payments for yourself. So absolutely, this is not a guarantee. But exactly what you then said is what makes a difference, which is ownership of the business. Because let's say you have a business that makes $10,000 a month in recurring revenue at its best, right? Like, you built this tool, you can't pay yourself $10,000 over 10,000 revenue because you have expenses. It's probably going to be with taxes, you're going to have like $5,000 left. And maybe you can pay you that, or you invested in the business or whatever. But that's 50K a year. Let's talk about, maybe say that, right? So the business itself generates $100,000 in annual recurring revenue, and you can make 50K a year from that business. Well, that is already interesting because that is all your money and you still own 100% of the business. You still have complete control over where the business is going. You still can hire other people or hire freelancers to do some work for you, bloggers or marketers or whatever, try to grow it. Or maybe more importantly, you could just sell it. And a business that does $100,000 in MRR, if you go to microacquire or you have a broker or something with what is it, like 2 to 5, I don't know, times yearly recurring revenue, that you're looking at $500,000 in potential.
Wow. Okay.
How much you can sell this 100K a year business for. It depends on the industry. It depends on who's willing to buy it. It depends on many factors, right? Like how much earnings you might derive, how good the P&L looks, how the projections look. All of that stuff could be like $250,000, could be $500,000. Now tell me, if getting 100K a year and you have to work 40 hours a week for it, or if getting potentially somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 in a one-time payment for a business that you hand over, and then you can build other businesses, or you can continue working in the business or on the business. Like, which is the more interesting opportunity?
Yeah, I just also think, maybe again, because maybe it's a different perspective, right? Like, and also the entrepreneurs that I speak with, most of us, we are not making more than €100 a month.
Yeah,
you know.
I know.
And there's a lot of dark moments, and I guess you also at yours, right?
Oh yeah.
What is the mindset there? Like when you're looking, I'm now with the podcast making $25 a month, right, with my members, but nice. I'm putting a lot of work, right? So. Yeah. This is far from paying the bills, and I'm checking my runway. I will eventually have to get a job. So there's a lot of low moments, and I guess for a lot of entrepreneurs, they have their low moments. Do you also have low moments?
Oh man, I have low moments all the time, because like obviously we always compare each other to other entrepreneurs and the kind of stuff they put out there. Right? You see Peter Levels building Nomad List and Remote OK, and you think, wow, it's just one PHP file and he's making millions. And you have all these interesting founders that share their progress. They also, the best ones, share their failures and their experiments too. Mm-hmm. But you see a lot of people making a lot more money. It's the same for me. Like, I'm a writer, I'm selling my books, and I sold, I must be over 10,000 books at this point, which is amazing. That's but then great. I see people like James Clear, Atomic Habits, and selling millions of books. And I think, oh man, I wish I could do this and all that stuff. And I wish my books could make me a millionaire. But the thing is, why does it have to, right? Like, if it is good enough to put some additional money into my account every month or every week, then that's the goal. The goal is not to just become the richest author in the world. The goal is to get to a point where the business efforts are sustainable. And it's the same, like what you say, $25 is a good start. It has to be more to be sustainable. And that's what I would work towards. I do this with my podcast too. I have sponsors on my podcast, right? I'm at episode 110, I think, this week. And it took a long time to get sponsors on the podcast. The first ones paid me like $50. So I could barely pay my ConvertKit newsletter fees with my sponsors, or my Transistor monthly fees with that. But now that I have a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand listeners and a reliable stream of sponsors, I can charge more. And I can charge $100, $150 per episode. And that's $500 a month, right? And I started my podcast 2 years ago. It took me over a year and a half to get sponsors. But now that I have them, other sponsors are interested. It's a long play. Yes. Everything you do when you're building a business, when you're building a bootstrap business, when you're building a media bootstrap business, is a long-term play. You have to trust that if you are consistent and you put in the effort and you allow people to invest in your journey, invest in you as a person, invest in your expertise, in your learning, in your teaching, that over time, provided that you take the chance on it, you will have opportunities to monetize what you're doing. That's the trust you need to have.
Yeah,
and
that's
everything
really important.
You do needs to go towards that.
So people might expect to have an overnight success, but it's really rare, right? So people have to think that, okay, it will take maybe years, 1-2 years to reach to a level of maybe sustainability in a business,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, absolutely. And it might not even happen. Like before we had Feedback Panda, Danielle and I founded Feedback Panda. I was
Mm-hmm.
part of a lot of software businesses that I co-founded with friends and colleagues from all different kinds of previous relationships that I had with them professionally, and most of them never went anywhere. We spent months building a product. We had marketing going on. We spent our own money, and it just didn't go anywhere. These were expensive lessons. Like I
Right.
was trying to build a local food marketplace in Berlin with my friends, like a digital website, like a marketplace for them, and that didn't find the resonance that we had hoped.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward to 2017, where Danielle and I founded Feedback Panda. We put a lot of our own money into it, and we had it as a side project for 9 months. In 9 months, I was a software engineer, full-time engineer. She was an online teacher, full-time teacher, and we had it moonlighting on the side for 9 months until it made about, must have been 15,000 euros in monthly recurring revenue. Because we put everything into the business to make it as automated as possible, to be as low touch as possible. We had Stripe integration, we had customer service automation systems in there, built that from the start because we knew this needs to stand on its own feet for us
Mm-hmm.
to spend our full-time energy on it. And until it does, we are going to do our full-time jobs.
Right.
So
Yeah.
the way to getting to this point is to build a side project and have it be as self-sustaining as possible.
It's possible.
At least that's what I see as the most effective
Mm-hmm.
way of de-risking
Yeah.
your business.
And keep on trying new things, right?
Yeah,
Keep
exactly.
on experimenting, and eventually, with a lot of work, you'll reach a certain degree of success. And does building in public help with that? Help with the motivation to keep your head in the game?
I think motivation is already an important word here. I think that there's motivation and accountability. Both of them need to be there for a person building a business, because I think we all like to be in our comfort zones. We all want to do the things that we know how to do them, and we don't want to fail. We don't want to show that we're weak. We don't want to show that we're vulnerable. And building in public allows us to experiment and fail and learn, and through that, build meaningful relationships with people. Personally, as a human being, when I am on Twitter and when I follow somebody, I don't follow them because they're super successful. I follow them because they're honest and because they're sharing when they fail. That's where I
Mm-hmm.
go. Right? That's when I really invest in a relationship on Twitter, is when I see people being truthful and being vulnerable and being themselves. That's where I put that's where I put my vote, by following them. And those people build in public. Those people share their emotional state. They share their goals. They share their dreams. They share their nightmares. They share what works, what doesn't work. And that is what's interesting. And that is what helps you build honest relationships with your potential customers, with other founders, with people who are interested in you. And it also builds this kind of feedback loop that quickly allows you to figure out if the things that you're doing are the things that you should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if you communicate while you're doing the things that you're doing and you share it with people in public, you are much, much faster at understanding why it will or will not work, what people's
Right.
reservations are, what you should do differently, than if you were to do this for months and months in isolation. And then you talk to people and then you figure out, oh, they don't want this at all. Or I completely misunderstood something. Wow, I wish I would have known that 5 months ago before I started building this.
But what is the difference between, because you can build in public, or at least get that feedback from your users without sharing publicly on Twitter, right? So you could just have a mailing list, you could just DM them and ask questions about their products. And I guess a lot of people do this, but this new movement, I call it new because I kind of discovered it recently, maybe it's not that new, of building in public. And for people that don't know, for instance, on Twitter, I don't know, there's already a lot of other platforms around it, but on Twitter, especially if you use the hashtag build in public, you'll see a lot of developers, a lot of marketeers, people building products and basically sharing their day-to-day, their goals, everything there. And for me, it's the most interesting hashtag that there is on Twitter. There's no spam, there's nothing like this. It's really, really interesting. When did this movement started, and what is the difference between sharing on Twitter and using this hashtag or whatever, and messaging people directly.
So the movement itself is actually not that young. It's just the social media part of it that is quite new. It started in like 2007, 2008 when Pat Flynn of the Passive Income podcast, when he started sharing his passive income strategies on the web and through blogs and kind of stuff. Like that kind of is the first real big occurrence of that. And you've seen it on Reddit in the meantime. There was the Entrepreneur Ride-Along subreddit where people just shared what they were doing. And forums, people were sharing their progress updates, building updates on forums. It just didn't have the name Build in Public back then. Just like the no-code movement has been around forever, right? There's what you see is what you get. That was back in 2000, like with Microsoft Front Page and Adobe Dreamweaver. That was the first no-code tool in the market. It wasn't called no-code then, and it's now more a web-based thing, but no-code has been around. It just had a different name, and Building in Public has been around. It just had an entrepreneur sharing their journey kind of name as well. And it kind of started, I think it must have been 2015, 16, 17, when people like Peter Levels were doing their building 10 or 100 businesses in public, sharing their every step along the way. You had it with the founder of Product Hunt. He shared his journey. Ryan Hoover, like his journey along the way, and Product Hunt came out of that, and you had it just people sharing their SaaS founder journey along the way there as well. And now it's this big thing on Twitter where people are building community around Building in Public, where founders help each other build in public and support each other as a kind of support network. So that's where it's coming from. And that's why it's so efficient. Because if you build in public today, you're not only doing this to get customers, right? You're not doing this as a marketing play. It's not a marketing strategy. It's a full-on approach to building a business. You find other founders who are either ahead on their journey, like they're further along than you are, and they can teach you what they learned, or you find other founders who are behind you on their journey, and you can teach them what you learned, and you get feedback on that when they start implementing it in their own businesses. So there's a founder side to that. And then there's the customer, the prospect side, the audience side, where you are involved with your community, not of founders, but of people who you're building your product for, and you get to have conversations with them on an ongoing basis, right? If you're a software engineer building for other software engineers, you get to talk to software engineers on Twitter, but you also get to talk to founders on Twitter. And if you're building for somebody who is not on Twitter, you build in public on another community, like on LinkedIn or on Facebook, and you get your feedback loops there. The tightness of the feedback loop, no matter if it's the entrepreneurial side or the professional side, the actual business that you're building, is incredibly useful. Like I said, you get information much faster. And maybe to illustrate that even more, you're building two brands at the same time. When you are on Twitter and you're sharing what you're doing in your business in public, you build a professional brand for the business, obviously,
a personal one.
And you build a personal brand among the founders. There is one thing about this personal brand. No matter if you mess up your business or not, right? Your business could fail, your business could fizzle out, or it could be super successful. Doesn't matter. The founder brand that you built by being a human being that shares the ups and downs, the learnings, and the stuff that they can teach on Twitter, you build an immutable brand. No matter what happens to your business, your founder brand.
Community. You keep the people. You keep your distribution channel.
Yes. And it's only going to grow over time, because the more you build, the more new people you attract in public, or the more people that other people help come to your brand, the stronger your brand will be over time. That's why building in public is so strong, because even if you fail, you will have this group of people that are invested in your next journey. Right? The next time you build something, they're going to be there for you.
Right. Is it important to then use your personal brand, your personal Twitter account to build your brand?
Is that a personal question? Am I hearing that? Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think it's something that often works better than having a brand that is only like the professional business that you're building, or doing both is also fine. But I think as a person, as a founder out there, your personal brand is quite valuable. Like look at people like Ryan Hoover, or look at people like Peter Levels. Right? They are the brand. It's not that Nomad List is the best business ever built, but it's the business that Peter Levels built.
Right.
And if it's not that Product Hunt is unique in the way that it lists things that people can upvote or downvote. Reddit works the same way in many ways, but it's like Ryan's brand, and it's he worked, and he is so active in the community that people supported him, and supported the products that he was building, and made Product Hunt the success that it was. So I highly recommend at least having yourself be attached to the brand very prominently.
Right.
In your case as well, right? Like, I'm just turning this into some personal consulting here. Yeah. I love what you're doing with your project right now, with the Wannapreneur, but I think your personal brand should be stronger in that, because you are who I want to see more and learn more about.
Yeah.
I love your other project, but I want to know more about you. Like, the Wannabe Entrepreneur is awesome. Now, who is it?
Exactly.
That's what people want to know, because we want to have personal, meaningful relationships with other people.
Makes total sense. And I've been trying to do that by having my picture as well.
You're in there.
By introducing myself. And initially what I thought was people, because I'm tweeting as the Wannabe Entrepreneur, and people be like, what is the Wannabe Entrepreneur, right? So that's what I thought. And if I'm tweeting as Tiago, people be like, okay, this is another guy. They don't know. They might not know that I have a product. So that was the idea initially. But the more I go through Twitter, I understand that it's important to connect yourself, a person to the brand. And I think it's definitely a great.
If I were to consult you on this, and sorry for just like pushing this kind of consulting stuff on you now, but I'm just looking at your profile. I think you're already doing something really great with like having your face on it, like, because that is what people resonate with. Like, it's the human voice, it's the human face, and it's the human name that people build mental models around, right? It's like you want to look at something, you want to hear something, and you want to know what to call it. That's kind of how we interact with people. And the Wannabe Entrepreneur is a wonderful name. I really, really love this, because it's
you're first person that likes it. A lot of people say, why do you call yourself a wannabe?
Because you talk to other people who are wannabes, right? You are clearly aiming at other people, and you want them to resonate with, oh yeah, I'm also a wannabe entrepreneur. What I would do in this case is just add your first name right to this, Tiago, the Wannabe Entrepreneur. That's that's all you need to do to personalize it, because now, okay, this is the name. I see the face, I hear him on the podcast, and now I know what to call him. And now whenever people talk about you in public somewhere, they say, Tiago, Tiago, the Wannabe Entrepreneur, that's the guy. Yeah. So that's really all I would do at this point. But
thank you so much for the free consultancy. It's really, really great idea. And thank you so much for all the knowledge that you shared in this conversation. I have 2 last quick questions for you to finish. The first one is, what is the thing about entrepreneurship, bootstrapping, that makes you the most joy? Is it getting a comment from a person or from a user? Is it getting money in the bank? What is the thing that really makes you cry tears of joy in this whole process?
Every time I see another founder like sharing some kind of success as a consequence of what they learned, either from me or from the people that talk about the things that I talk about, and like whenever I see a founder enjoy success, some kind of success, even if it's the smallest bit, like, oh, I got my first customer today, or I got my 10th customer today, or I got my 107th customer today, that just makes me happy. Like, seeing somebody empowering themselves, either through my work or other work by people in the community, it just makes me smile, because anything that gets people to closer to the moment of financial stability, themselves owning the means of production for their life, owning the sources of income, anything I see, any kind of empowerment I see in the community just makes me happy.
We can feel that when we chat with you, and with everything you do. I think it's really important, and it's really nice. And
thank you so much.
One last question here from sure. Bogdan. He wrote here on Twitter, and I think it's a great question to finish our interview with. Is which was the biggest failure, I guess, in your career, and how do you see this failure now versus how you saw this failure then?
So yeah, professionally, I think the example with I hinted at it, the local food marketplace here in Berlin. So I co-founded this business with two friends of mine, one of which was a designer, and the other one was like very entrepreneurial. He came from a family that had a little walnut tree farm, and like he knew exactly what like the local food situation was. He was himself a foodie, and we all kind of were interested in that because Berlin is a city full of hipsters that want good food, and Berlin is surrounded by a lot of really interesting local food producers, like high quality, locally, regionally produced food. And we wanted to connect the two. And what we did was we assumed that all the foodies in Berlin needed a marketplace, and all the suppliers outside of Berlin needed a marketplace, a web-based marketplace to sell their food through. And we never asked them. We never asked anybody out there, well, if you wanted to buy local food, would you go to a website? What would you do? And we never asked the people on the other side of the marketplace, the farmers, if you want to sell your food to more people in the city, would a web-based application be something that you would even be remotely interested in? Or would you go to your computer, or how would you approach it? We never did the research. We just thought, hey, we know how to build a website. We have a designer to make it look cool. And then we spent literally 6 months in an office that we rented, on computers that we bought, on hiring people. We had some funding from the European Union, kind of VC-like funding for a smart city project. We just spent time in that office building a platform that nobody needed, that nobody said is something that they would use. Then we launched it and nothing happened. That is the biggest failure of my software engineering and entrepreneurial career. And what we learned was that if you don't talk to people, all your assumptions are just assumptions. If you don't validate with people out there, you are going to build something that nobody needs. You're going to waste your time. You're going to waste your money. And that was an expensive learning.
But it's an honest mistake, because when you pitch this idea, I think, wow, that's a great idea. I want to use it.
I want to use it too. That's the thing. But we just built it in a way that people didn't resonate with. Like they didn't want to have a marketplace where they had to scroll through each potential vendor and select the items that may or may not be available today. Because, like if you're a bakery, sometimes you have the bread, sometimes it's out of stock. The bakery didn't want to keep updating their profile on our website all the time. We just didn't figure out the logistics of it. The idea was
but
nice.
The problem exists, right? The problem, I guess, still exists.
Is there. It's just not the same solution.
Yeah, maybe the next project, Arvid.
Yeah, maybe.
Do it honestly, the right way now.
Well, at this point, I would definitely do it in a different way. I would immediately go to food markets, like local food market, actual markets, and talk to the vendors about their experiences with the digital world. Like, have you ever done anything on the internet, or why haven't you? And then I would try to figure out what is in the way of them getting into like a more digital way, right? A digital way of doing marketing, digital way of getting people to buy their stuff. I would just approach it very differently. And the thing is, if I hadn't done this, if I hadn't failed so horribly, I would never have the experience that I had when I started FeedbackPanda. Right? I would never have thought, okay, we need to talk to these teachers before we build anything. And Danielle and I, we chatted with a lot of teachers. We built a prototype that Danielle tested extensively before we ever considered like putting it on the market. We got beta users quite early, so we could test it with them. And like all the learnings that we had from our failed things before in life really, really helped us build this much better. And listening to a lot of podcasts and reading lots of books, that really helped too. But
and you learn more from your mistakes than from your successes, for sure.
Because success just happens, and maybe you were lucky, maybe it was intentional, but you learn a lot from failure too. It's both. You need both, right? It's not you can just learn exclusively from mistakes, but you need to be able to own them and to accept that you failed. You had a wrongful assumption, and now you need to have a different assumption and test that. You need to experiment.
Arvid, thank you so much for your time. And it was really lovely to chat with you. I think we could chat for hours, but I think there's already a lot of information here, a lot of interesting facts and tips for all my listeners, all my wannabe entrepreneurs. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. That was a really nice conversation. And we did cover quite a lot of things. So
Yes. Yeah, I
that
really
was
enjoyed it,
awesome.
and I will link all of your books in the description, in the show notes of the episode.
Thank you.
And I also, something that we didn't end up speaking too much about, which is our most recent project, Building Public Book. But I think it's very interesting, cool project that people can actually sign up and help you build your book, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to write it in public because what's better about a building public project than building public project itself in public? So trying to
Yeah.
be very meta with this one and have people involved from the start. So yeah, if they go to buildingpublicbook.com, they can sign up to be like an alpha reader. The moment I have the first draft together, and I'm kind of writing it article by article every week anyway. So if you go to my blog, the Bootstrap Founder .com, you will see every week there's a new article that may or may not be a chapter in the book anyway. So I'm building
Mhm.
all of this as I go. So if people are interested, just follow my journey, and I'll just talk about this nonstop anyway. So
Definitely. I will definitely follow for sure. And now for the listeners, this was another interview. I hope you had fun and learned a lot. I know that I definitely did. And there are a lot of other interviews with other entrepreneurs, marketeers, designers. So make sure to check them out. You can just go to the website and click on episodes, and then you can even filter by interviews and listen to the ones that most interest you. If you want to support this podcast, I don't do any advertisement, so you can become a member or just buy me a coffee. If you do become a member, you can gain access to our virtual co-working space for bootstrappers, a place that is filled with other entrepreneurs from multiple backgrounds, and you can find mentorship and support. I love to be in that community, and I'm excited to see you there. And you pay a monthly subscription of €4 per month. The link will also be in the description of this episode. Besides that, make sure to share this episode with all of your entrepreneur friends. I'm sure they will also appreciate it. And give a nice review on Apple Podcasts, because that really helps to bump the visibility of my show. This was another Wannabe Entrepreneur. See you next Tuesday.